if your nose doesn't have the right moisture, the right pH level, or its beneficial flora have been altered through antibiotic use, environmental pollution, or products that you use in your nose that you shouldn't, excessive sterilants, that once you alter that balance, that plays into this puzzle. I'm so passionate about protecting our bees because there is medicine in apitherapy that is truly life altering. And I think they just, I sound like such a paranoid person, but I just think the powers that be don't want us to know that. They don't want us to have access to that. And glyphosate is going to destroy that magic for us. If we continue to poison our bees and destroy their environment and poison the air with the EMFs and disrupt their patterns, our species won't survive. We're utterly dependent upon our pollinators.
Welcome to the Radical Health Rebel podcast with your host, Leigh Brandon. If you enjoy the podcast, please leave a 5-star rating and a warm review. Your opinions are important, and your ratings help grow the podcast and help educate people to lead a healthier, more productive, fulfilling and happy life. If video is your thing, please check out the Radical Health Rebel YouTube channel, where you'll find fun bite-sized clips from each episode. And now, here is Leigh, the Radical Health Rebel, with this week's podcast.
Joyce Dales, welcome to the Radical Health Rebel podcast. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm really excited about today's episode. And today's episode is entitled Allergy Be Gone with Joyce Dales. Now, one type of allergy, allergic rhinitis, also known as hay fever, affects between 10 and 15% of children and 26% of adults in the UK. In Europe, the prevalence of allergic rhinitis ranges between 4 and 32%. More than 40% of patients with allergic rhinitis have asthma, and more than 80% of asthmatic patients have rhinitis. And patients with rhinitis have an increased risk of developing asthma. Up to 57% of adult patients and up to 88% of children with allergic rhinitis have sleep problems, leading to daytime fatigue and somnolence and decreased cognitive function. Countries with very high prevalence of allergic rhinitis include Australia, New Zealand, and the United Kingdom. And I'm going to ask Joyce a little bit about that later on. So in this episode, I'll be asking Joyce Dales, founder of Buzzagogo, about the nasal biome and what we can do to fight nasal allergy symptoms, soothe inflammation, and how to support your nasal biome. So to kick things off, Joyce, can you share a little with the audience about you, perhaps your upbringing, your educational background, and your career to date?
All right. Well, I grew up in the United States in Maine. I lived a very, very rural upbringing as a child. So we were very connected to nature. My grandmother had this little country store, like you can imagine, where the hunters would hang out, all the deer hunters, and we made food for all of them. We had gardens, we pickled, we canned. So I was raised in an environment where there was a solution in nature to every problem that we had. Whether it was hunger or illness or what have you, there was a solution nearby in nature. And so that stayed with me all my life. And when I was older, I had just married my husband and I was a school teacher. And we decided to adopt our first baby girl from Vietnam. And we traveled to Vietnam to pick her up. And in the middle of her adoption, she required emergency open heart surgery due to a congenital heart defect that is attributed to Agent Orange, because generations of children still are being affected by this forever chemical. It's a petrol-based chemical, so it is a forever chemical. It's not going anywhere unless we scrape 2 feet of soil off of Vietnam, which, of course, will never happen. So her heart was completely backwards. She needed a full pulmonary graft. And today I'm going to fast forward for all the parents that are panicking, because every time you hear about a sick kid, it gives us all panic. She's a healthy 15-year-old. She's just started driving and she's an athlete. So she's amazing. But at that time, when I brought her home, she was deemed immunocompromised. And this was 15 years ago. So immunocompromised, which we're all familiar with now, was a new thing to me. And it was terrifying. So I was living in that headspace of every cough and sniffle was terrifying to me. It was scary. It was a direct threat to her well-being and health. And all of the solutions that allopathy and medical care was offering me was unacceptable. It just sounded like additional poison to her. And in my opinion, her epigenetics were already going askew from being poisoned. So that didn't make sense to me. So I went back to my roots of everything my grandmother had taught me, and I started a remedy company focused on apitherapy, on bee medicine specifically. And that's how I started my little company, out of a need to protect her, and also an arrogant belief that cold and flu are not unsolvable. They're just really big business. So I dove into, how do we get sick? How do we prevent getting sick? And it's actually quite simple. So that was sort of the foundation of why I'm where I'm at today.
Mm. So that was your motivation, I guess, to look into natural remedies.
Mm-hmm.
What was the motivation specifically to study the nasal biome?
Well, as I began to learn about how we get sick, I was fascinated. Again, it wound up being much more simple than I ever believed it could be. 99% of the time, we get sick when we touch our eyes, ears, nose, or face. So when you touch anything above the head, any opening, it will the pathogen will travel to the upper adenoid, upper nasal passages, the upper adenoid zone, the back of the nose, top of the throat, and it will latch on there and remain there dormant for 1 to 14 days, because that's where the receptors are for pathogens to latch onto and pass their code to our cells. So at some point in that 10 to 14 dormancy phase period, the pathogen will pass its code to our cells. And then within 1 to 4 hours, our cells will begin to replicate that code millions of times over. So our cells actually make us sick. They do the dirty work for the pathogen. I was fascinated by this. And I further learned that how much you colonize, because that's called colonization. That's when you begin to colonize in the nasal pharynx. How much you colonize, how severe it gets, how long you stay, or directly impacts how severely you get sick, how long you get sick, and how infectious you are to other people. So I'm like, well, that's amazing. That's really critical information. I mean, it's yes, it's as simple as wash your hands, but people want to know more. Why? We all think somebody coughs and sneezes over here, we're going to get sick. And that's true, but I didn't need to fear that as much anymore. It's actually really hard to catch enough viral load airborne, than they would have you believe, than it is to just inoculate yourself with enough viral material to to start the colonization process. So I thought that was fascinating. And here's the other part of the puzzle that was interesting, was that if your nose doesn't have the right moisture, the right pH level, or its beneficial flora have been altered through antibiotic use, environmental pollution, or products that you use in your nose that you shouldn't, excessive sterilants, that once you alter that balance, that plays into this puzzle. So your ability to colonize and severity of colonization are directly impacted by your overall nasal biome health. So I'd always heard, we all know about gut health, which gut health is about restore and maintaining the entire system. But nasal biome health is about trapping and preventing, because the action of trap and prevent, which is directly, it's dictated by the health of your nasal mucosa, that dictates how sick you are, how sick you make others, and whether or not it can reach your lungs. So that's a critical component to all of it. I was fascinated by that. And the other part that played into it that I learned was when my husband was in law school, he had an elective surgery and he got hospital-acquired MRSA, and it nearly took his life. He had several surgeries, had to have skin grafting, lost some bones. I mean, it was a truly terrifying time. And after that happened, he was told by the doctor, well, you may be colonized. That's where I first heard that. You may be colonized for a while. 25% of all medical personnel are colonized with VRE or MRSA in their nasal pharynx at any given time. And so you may be at risk for a repeat infection. So I asked the doctor, well, what do you do about that? And he said, well, we offer the medical personnel these ampules of alcohol that you can burst into the nasal pharynx and it will sterilize. And if it does a good enough job, great, then the antibiotic resistant MRSA is destroyed. If you don't do a good enough job, then that MRSA can evolve and become more antibiotic resistant. However, in doing so, if you do a good enough job, you alter your pH and your flora in such a way that you become more susceptible to chronic sinusitis, allergies, rhino issues, everything. You catch every bug down the road for the next however long until you can restore your biome. So it's kind of like carpet bombing your first line of defense for your entire biome. And it may achieve success in getting rid of this antibiotic resistant colonization that you've got, but you create new problems down the road. So that was one of the most critical things that I learned in my journey about how we get sick and how to not get sick. So once I learned that the nose is a biome and it's the first line of defense for the whole thing, it was a game changer for me. It really empowered me. I didn't need to be afraid of every sneeze in the store.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the skin, the nose, and the oral cavity are the first line of defense. But, you know, the fact that we should be breathing through our nose most of the time, right? Unless we're under severe stress or we're exercising very hard, we should be always breathing through the nose. And obviously our skin does a slightly different job, but, you know, it still is part of the first line of defense. So, yeah, I couldn't agree more that, you know, that the nose, the nasal passage is so, so important, and therefore the nasal biome. So just taking you back to when your daughter was first sick, and obviously you had the background of natural health growing up, but where did you turn to study that kind of led you on the path to the nasal biome? Like, did you do any, was it just personal study, or did you do any kind of, you know, structured study?
Well, learning about the nasal biome was entirely, you know, Dr. Google, the thing we're forbidden to do, but how else can you empower yourself? So I'm just a regular mom who has that sort of ridiculous, rabid motivation to solve a problem for someone you love. But the other component, the apitherapy component, other than being an obsessive hobbyist, I tend to obsessively research anything that interests me. And at that time, I was really into super honeys. I actually contacted Dr. Peter Mullen, the father of Manuka honey at University of Waikato, and I just arrogantly called him, and I got the man on the phone, and we started this email relationship where he taught me everything about Manuka honey in particular, about super honeys, and I back and forth with him for over the course of 2 years while I was developing my concepts and my product, and he guided me on that path. So he was, I would say, the one expert that I really tapped into the heaviest. Everything else was just sort of dealing with our international travel doctors and dealing with my doctors, cardiologists. And I would constantly take advantage of those appointments and be like, hey, can you confirm, what is your thinking on this? And quite often what I was being told in those appointments, when I went and did my own research, I would find a lot of contradictory information that completely flew in the face of what I was being told. And so that drove me forward even further.
Yeah. So pretty much it was just, you went off your own bat and just did your own research, and that's where you found all this information.
Yeah, it's out there. I mean, a lot of it is actually not out there anymore, which is strange. That's a new reality for us all in the last 24 months. But before, when the internet was truly free and uncensored, you could teach yourself everything you need to know about these things.
Yeah, yeah. So before we carry on, I guess the next question we need to answer is, what is the nasal biome?
Well, the nasal biome is the nasal mucosal system. It's got this fantastic name. Hang on. I've got it written down. Oh, I'll find it while we're talking. I have all these sticky notes all around me about my research. It's like I'm trying to find a serial killer. It's ridiculous, but it's all about snot. It's just this research charts about snot. The nasal mucosal system is a combination of the moisture, the salt, the mucus that your body produces through the nasal passages. All of that is designed to trap and prevent pathogens, dust, pollutants from entering your body and getting to your lungs. It's sort of the gatekeeper for all of that. And it very delicately works together to achieve that. And if you throw it out of balance, then it can't do what it's designed to do, right down to whether or not you've got the right humidity. So we were talking earlier about how many people get allergies in different sections of the world. And I think that has a lot to do with humidity and moisture.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I certainly find when the weather gets really cold, generally, I get a little bit of a runny nose, not like a streaming nose, but just a little bit of a runny nose. But whenever the weather, you know, springtime, summertime, I never get that at all.
Well, that's the heat differential. That's the cold air versus your hot air exiting. Do you know, they just did CNN finally just confirmed. I mean, thank goodness CNN can confirm these things that we've known for hundreds of years, but they just confirmed that cold weather does indeed increase your risk of catching a cold. And then they very lightly brushed on why, which is it changes your biodiversity. So cold air destroys some of your beneficial flora that is fragile in that temperature. And therefore, once you change the balance of your nasal biome, then you increase your risk of infection. That's how delicate the nasal biome is.
Mm. And when you say flora, what do you mean?
Mostly lactobacillus. Your nose is loaded with beneficial lactobacillus of, hundreds of different, maybe thousands of species. It's actually not well understood. They're just starting to study it now, but primarily because they want to shove a lot of things up our nose that probably don't belong there.
Mm. It's interesting. I mean, I've done a lot of research into the human microbiome, and indeed, I recently did a episode with Debbie Cotton from In Vivo Healthcare, who's a real expert in the human microbiome. And I've studied the oral microbiome, the skin microbiome, the stomach microbiome, the lung microbiome, the small intestine, the large intestine, vaginal microbiome, but I haven't studied the nasal microbiome, which is quite interesting.
Well, it's just like your mouth. It's just like the vagina. It's a very delicate tissue. It's easy to tear. It's very vascular, and it is very prone to swelling and irritation. So we have to treat it delicately. Although kids have been sticking their fingers up their nose for millions of years, and that's Mother Nature's way of inoculating that biome and getting it fully. So living in a sterile environment and the way kids live today, I think that really interferes with their biome development.
Mm. I know Dr. Zach Bush has been talking quite a lot in the last 3 years about the importance of your environment in terms of your biome. And, doing things like going for walks in woodland can have quite a positive effect on your microbiome. And if you think about it, if you're walking through a woodland, where are you getting most of that from? It's through the nose, right? Because you're walking through the woodland and you've got all the flora that exists in the woodland, and you're breathing it in, right? So you say most of the nasal passages, different forms of lactobacilli.
Yes.
I'm guessing is there? I would have thought there's some kind of fungi as well that's quite common in the nasal passage. Would that be right?
I believe so, but I can't tell you the name of it.
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, we do, fungus, mold, bacteria. Everybody thinks those words are negative words. They're not negative words. They belong there. We are comprised of those things, just like the rest of nature.
Yeah, but the only problem becomes if you've got an unbalanced microbiome, and then you can get too much of a certain fungus, and that can be harmful to the body.
Yeah, pathogens. The pathogens are only kept in check by the good guys. So you have this constant battle of bad guys versus good guys going on even in your nose. And if they're out of balance and one can't check the other, then it can become a runaway train of potential illness.
And in terms of the anatomy, have you looked at the anatomy of the nasal passages?
Yeah, in terms of that, I'm fascinated by that with regards to allergies, because a lot of allergies you don't produce mucus like you do with illness. A lot of allergies, you feel completely stuffed up, but it's a non-productive swelling of the nasal canals and passages and ridges and all of the soft tissue going all the way up. My daughter actually suffers from that. So that non-productive swelling can become so chronic that your biodiversity is utterly destroyed because your nasal immune system is so busy trying to deal with its own illness, with its own disruption, that that increases your risk for catching everything down the pike because your nose is chronically swollen. And I thought it was really fascinating that honey is a vasoconstrictor. It helps dilate and helps take that non-productive swelling out of the nasal passages, but without sterilizing the biome. It can do it very gently without destroying all the flora. It's actually a prebiotic and a probiotic, so it can feed and enhance your nasal biodiversity. And raw honeys in particular that aren't sterilized or pasteurized in any way, they contain a lot of natural lactobacillus. So for me, that was like the ultimate solution. Like, why wouldn't we do that?
Yeah. So I guess my next question is, and this is something that you mentioned earlier about, the way that we get sick. In your studies, how would you say that, we do get sick?
Most of the time we touch our eyes, ears, nose, or face. You scratch your ears, that pathogen will take the journey to the colonization zone. You scratch your eyeball, it makes the journey to the colonization zone, the upper adenoid zone, the back of the nose, top of the throat, back of the nose. And that's where it's going to latch on to those receptor cells like an imposter, like a fake key, stick itself in there and wait and remain dormant to pass its code on to your cells to begin replicating. And once you start colonizing and replicating, that may not happen anywhere from 1 to 14 days after the pathogen gets into your body. But once it starts, that's when you feel the thing, whatever your first tell of an illness is. A lot of people, it's in the throat feels swollen. Some people, eyes begin watering, whatever your tell is. Once that colonization process starts it happens, you are replicating millions upon millions of cells with that viral illness encoded in them within 4 hours. So that's how fast that can happen. So I was fascinated by, well, if it's dormant, there's this huge dormancy phase. What can we do about that without completely destroying the nasal biome? How do you get in there and do something about that virus latched on? If it made it that far, if it made it past your nasal mucosa, if it made it past your pH, if it's gotten to where it needs to go to latch on, what then? What can we do about that? So for me, that was how I approached it.
And what's your view on, germ theory versus terrain theory and how that links into the nasal microbiome?
You're listening to the Radical Health Rebel podcast.
Are you regularly suffering from painful bloating and wind that can be smelly and embarrassing? Are your bowel movements not as they should be, either constipation or diarrhea, or possibly alternating between the two? Do you find the pain is bad enough, but the bloating and cramps make you feel awful and are affecting your everyday life? Do you sometimes feel you can't eat properly because of the wind, bloating and pain? And has your doctor told you that you have IBS, but unable to help find you a solution? Do you feel right now that you simply don't know what's causing your symptoms and whatever your doctor has suggested hasn't worked? And you feel frustrated that you're still far from having a normal, flat, comfortable tummy? Have you invested a lot of time, energy and money into improving your symptoms and don't wish to waste any more? Do you feel frustrated and depressed and don't feel like you can take part in all the activities you enjoy, and sometimes have to cancel attending events because of the way your tummy feels? Do you fear that if you don't get this sorted, you could end up with a much more serious gastrointestinal disease? Well, if so, what would help you right now is to understand the root cause of your digestive condition, rather than continuing to try to mask the symptoms with over-the-counter or prescribed medications. You need help understanding how factors such as nutrition, gut health, stress, and toxicology affect the digestive system and how to optimize these factors. You need someone who can advise, motivate, and support you every step of the way, someone who has walked the path before and taught many others to do the same. What you need is my Overcome Your Digestive Issues program. My Overcome Your Digestive Issues program can help you in the following ways. I will help you understand the root causes of your digestive problems and teach you how to approach the condition holistically via expert advice on nutrition and lifestyle factors. The Overcome Your Digestive Issues program will start by ensuring you are on the right diet for you based on your genetics or metabolic type, and one that avoids the foods that are known to exacerbate your condition. We'll go on a journey step by step, learning all the necessary lifestyle changes required to achieve a flat, comfortable, pain-free tummy. Each weekly 30-minute coaching session will include advice, support and guidance specifically tailored to your needs and at a speed that is right for you. Once you're eating right for your metabolic type, you will begin to see changes in how your tummy feels, and we will also uncover all the necessary blocking factors that you may have, and you'll be taught how to reduce, replace, or eliminate all the factors that are causing your digestive problems. Ultimately, this program will enable you to achieve a flat, calm, and comfortable tummy every day for the rest of your life. For more information about how to improve your gut health and to claim a complimentary, no-obligation gut health consultation, please go to www.bodycheck.co.uk, that's BODYCHEK, and fill in the request form at the top of the homepage, and we'll be in contact to arrange a convenient time. Now, back to the podcast.
Oh, terrain all the way for me. I think about the body as its, as its own planet. I think of things like rings, your body, your internal biome, your external biome, your home, your food biome, that these different rings, like we're taught about nature, the circles of life around us that grow ever increasingly larger and larger and larger. And the health of each one of those things impacts one another. So for instance, in order to deal with modern living, okay, I have a baby that's just home with open heart surgery. My inclination is to clean her hands all the time, to make sure her environment is sterile and blah, blah, blah. And I had to configure all of my thinking about that once I began my research into the human biome and the terrain and how that directly impacts our health. And now I like to think of my home. When we lived in villages, we would go to Market Square Day and interact with like 200 to 400 people a week tops. And that is our biome. That's our community biome. And we could manage the exposures we would get for that and develop appropriate immunity to that. And when we interacted with nature, we'd have a strong terrain in order to do that. But now with modern living, I'm touching the same railing that 5,000 other people have touched in 1 week. And I think we're over challenging our biomes, that no matter how hard, between that and pollution and the food corruption and all of that, how in heaven's name can we stay ahead of that? So I like to keep my children somewhat cloistered. I am very passionate about keeping our circles small. If we don't stay home, we're out sailing, we're out on the lake, we're interacting, but we're not, every time we go to an airport, if it's a human germ, yes, I'm going to use organic alcohol to clean my child's hand if we're at the airport. But when we're home, I do not overly sterilize our environment. I'm not asking my children to shower every day. So I treat germs very differently when it comes to building our terrain. I like to think if it's something that's out there in the world that's a human pathogen that we've just been at the airport, then yes, we come home, clothes off, into the shower. But when it comes to building our terrain naturally with my kids, I'm letting them lick the rocks at the lake. I'm letting them roll around in the mud and go to bed with that on them. Like that's how I've dealt with it as a mom.
Mm. So for you, some people, they're staunch believers in germ theory. There are others that are staunch believers in the terrain theory. Where do you sit? Do you sit on one side or the other, or are you somewhere in the middle?
I am heavily leaning towards terrain. I'm not settled on anything because I always have that feeling these days that nothing is truly settled, but I do fall more heavily in the camp of terrain, that there's a lot we can do, because I really believe energetically there's a lot we can do to help ourselves and impact our terrain. And I don't want to believe otherwise. I don't want to believe that we're utterly helpless to anything.
So when you spoke earlier about pathogens, obviously that's almost in the germ theory camp, isn't it?
Yeah.
So how does that fit in with terrain theory in your view?
Well, I think of it like the things that are outside of my control. Like I know that pathogens exist. I know this. I know that pathogens are being created. I'm not a scientist that fully understands that. But I want to be an optimist and believe that if I do the right things, I can and protect my terrain and build my terrain. I can do something about anything that that tries to enter my biome that doesn't belong, that is unnatural, that doesn't belong there. Because I wholeheartedly believe most of the things that are unhealthy, that are going to try to attack us, aren't natural anymore. It's all become mutated. So how do you fight against that?
Yeah, it's interesting. For instance, you can have let's call it an outbreak of a disease, and you have 5 people in a home and 2 people get sick and 3 don't. Right. Well, if germ theory was 100% true, if you had 5 people living in one home, 5 people would get ill.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So that does lean towards germ theory. I'm definitely leaning towards germ theory, but I don't think towards terrain theory. But I don't think I think there's a certain truth to germs, as you said, pathogens, right? If you get, for instance, I don't know, you're out one day and you buy a burger and it wasn't cooked properly.
Yeah.
Now you've got some nematode or something in your system, and that's probably going to affect anybody, or certainly most humans anyway. Maybe if it was a dog ate it, the dog could deal with it no problem at all. But again, that's terrain theory, right? Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think the terrain is the most important thing, because that's the only thing we can control, really, to a degree.
Right.
If there are pathogens in our environment, yeah, you can take certain steps to try and avoid them. But at the end of the day, you're probably going to come across them. When you hear someone like Dr. Zach Bush say that, in the air, there's 30 to the 10 viruses in the air at any one point. I mean, 30 to the 10, I couldn't even tell you what number that is. It's such a big number, I can't even get my head around it. So for anyone to think that they can avoid inhaling a virus, I think is deluded, really. So what choice have you got other than, well, if I make my terrain as strong as possible, I've got my immune system as strong as possible, what else can you do?
That's all you can do. And I mean, most of us are always striving for better health. I know during the pandemic, so many of my friends have become less healthy during the pandemic. And so I like to think that, even though we're always constantly, if you're, in good faith, trying to build our terrain, that takes time. And that's constantly being undermined by things that are so far out of our control. So what can we do in the meantime to have tools, a sort of like a little, what's in your arsenal of tools that what's in your tool chest that you can deploy for your family to help give you the edge that is constantly being chipped away by other outside influences and pollutions and things you can't control. So that's just how I'm always looking at it. Like, what can I control? Because it becomes overwhelming. This world that we're in right now is overwhelming. As a mom, when you try to tackle all of the, get rid of the plastic and cook on, non-toxic materials and all of these little things we try to do, you can feel that you're being undermined at every turn. It's overwhelming. So I like to think of, maintaining as many things in your house that help you feel like you're back in control of what's going on. For me, tackling the nasal biome, I was amazed that no one had ever done this before. I was astonished. Like, why aren't people talking about the nasal biome? Why aren't we telling moms it's more than just washing your kids' hands? When you come in your home, you shouldn't be Cloroxing everything. You should clean 3 things. You drop your keys, take off your shoes, and clean your phone. Then that's it. Your home biome can be your ratty little hamster cage, and enjoy your home biome and let it be what it's going to. I mean, sure, you clean and dust, obviously, but you do not use chemicals to sterilize every surface unless you've just put raw chicken on it or something. Right. Just using common sense to just, do what you can to maintain your terrain and to build it back up, and to not live in fear. Because I think fear, the energy of fear is like, I couldn't even put a percentage to what I might think that has to do with what we're all going through right now, and the sickness that creates.
Yeah. And it's interesting, the last 3 years, it seems like everything that we could do for ourselves was shunned, it was censored, right, and it was banned. Right. Vitamin D. I mean, obviously, I think most of the people that were shunning these things have kind of, they've kind of told the truth more recently, because I think they couldn't get away with it any longer. But, vitamin C, zinc, there's a drug that I won't mention that begins with the letter I. And there was another one that begins with the letter H that we know were very effective. We know sunlight is very effective, but yet
and vitamin D.
We were locked indoors, right? So it's almost like the authorities are trying to take away every little piece of self-responsibility and really wanting us to become completely reliant on what they tell us that we can do in terms of building our health.
I think they're trying to destroy the terrain. I think every one of those things is a terrain destroying piece of advice.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, certainly we had a little chat before we started recording, and there's a lot of chemicals floating around the air in the US at the moment, and again, what's that going to do to the nasal biome?
Yeah. Oh, there was a chemical fire in the Netherlands and in Italy too last week.
Right.
So what is happening? That's going to go into the stratosphere. That's going to be rained down upon us. That's not confined to the area of that fire. That is now being dispersed around the globe right now. So what is that going to do when the animals eat that grass and the fish in the ocean are impacted by those forever chemicals? The amount of we're just basically being poisoned 24/7, and it's overwhelming. So I think that's where you're just building your terrain all the time. And every single piece of advice that you just, that they have told us in the last, forever, but mostly in the last 3 years, is to destroy your terrain. You don't need vitamin D. No. You'll get skin cancer if you go out in the sun 10 minutes a day. All of those things. Your mitochondria, when you go out in the morning and get that morning sun and it helps your mitochondria through your eyes. No. You're going to get skin cancer. Don't do that. Wear a hat, wear sunglasses. Every single piece of advice is intended to hurt us and destroy our terrain and make us vulnerable. Everything. Is it cynical? I sound so cynical, don't I?
Well, I think it's just being, honest. But, when you look at, in 2020, gyms were closed, but yet you could go and buy junk food.
Right. And booze.
Yeah. I mean, I think alcohol and cigarette sales went through the roof in 2020, right? So, yeah, but
thank God I was able to get organic grain alcohol. I will forever be grateful I was still able to get organic grain alcohol, because I cleaned everything with that. That was how I deal with when my kids come in from swim practice with their phones. I clean it with grain alcohol. I mean, because that just makes sense. If you have something that's coming in from the outside that's, I want them to be able to touch surfaces and things in my home. But if it's an outside thing, it does get cleaned before it comes in. And I do really believe strongly in taking your shoes off when you come home. The amount of potential germs that comes in on there. I love that. I probably picked it up from adopting my children from China and Vietnam, but I really take that one to heart. So take your shoes off. I believe in that. I think it messes up your terrain, your home terrain, to leave your shoes on to come in the house.
Just changing subjects a little bit. What do you think of some of the more commonly used products that people use in the nasal passage?
Most of them contain sodium benzoate, because in order to change the viscosity of something to be a spray, you have to have an excessive amount of saline or sodium benzoate, or if it's a gel, usually alcohol. Organic glycerin is fine. We're actually formulating some remedies with organic plant-based glycerin, non-GMO. That's fine. That doesn't disrupt the flora in the same way. But those other things are sterilants. And if you sterilize, in order to be a viscosity, you have to sterilize that product. And once you introduce a sterilant to your biome, you're sterilizing your biome. And that works against, I think, the bigger goal, which is to enhance your nose so that it can do its job. Don't undermine the nose's ability to do its job. Think of it like you think of it, your gut biome. You want to help it be the best it can be. And how can you do that? So read the backs of bottles, because sodium benzoate in particular, if it's combined with any vitamin C producing thing, it can be a carcinogenic. And that's hugely problematic in a delicate mucosal system.
Mm. So really, it's like an antibiotic up the nose, really.
Yeah.
And we know antibiotics can save people's lives in certain situations, but we also know that if they're overused, it can also kill people. Right? I mean, you spoke about MRSA earlier, and, we know that that's a very dangerous superbug. We call them superbugs over here in the UK, and they're generally caught in hospitals, right? Well, what do they do in hospitals? They sterilize everything.
Right. Do you know what they're starting to use in hospitals now? Medi-honey, super honeys to fight the superbugs. So have you ever talked to anybody about how Manuka works against superbugs? What makes a super honey a super honey?
No.
Let me nerd out about that for a second. So for instance, they're now using super honeys in alginate bandages for dirty field wounds in the military. So the military now have basically honey infused dressings. So basically how a honey is classified as super honey is that it all honey has UPF, unique peroxide activity. So it has like a level of peroxide that allows it to, deal with a cut or a wound and keep it from getting infected. But a super honey has some quality that goes far beyond that. And when it comes to Manuka honey can reverse antibiotic resistant bacteria. So for instance, if you've got a wound that has gone septic and you've gone septic systemically and your wound is the source of that, that's your colonization site. And no antibiotics are working against it, and you're getting flesh-eating MRSA, and it's a runaway train. If you apply medical grade Manuka that has the high enough methylglyoxal, which is what makes Manuka special, it's what Dr. Mullen found. If you apply it to that colonization site, it inhibits the pathogen's ability to put a biofilm around itself. And that biofilm is what evades your antibiotics and evades your own immune system. So suddenly, even though you're septic and it's an infection throughout your body, at the colonization site, your antibiotics can start to work and the pathogen can no longer colonize with its protective biofilm. So it reverses the antibiotic resistant bacteria's ability to evade your body and your drugs. So in that instance, antibiotics would be very important. So now they're now using medical grade Manuka honey on wounds in hospitals, and it's called MediHoney, and it's saving diabetic patients' limbs from being cut off. It is remarkable stuff. And there are other super honeys around the world. For instance, there's a Scottish Highland heather honey that works in the exact same way as Manuka in terms of reversing antibiotic resistance, but they don't know why. It's not methylglyoxal in Scottish Highland heather honey. They haven't figured out what that component is. And they've also tried to replicate the honey's ability to do this by taking ordinary raw honey and then adding methylglyoxal to it. And it's not quite the same. It can't achieve the same effect that the bees are achieving on their own with their own saliva, their own enzymatic activity in the tea tree. So the bee magic cannot be replicated. There's also another honey in the Pacific Rim that reverses hormone disruption in perimenopausal women and in older men. It completely reverses hormone issues. There's a propolis, which is a honey byproduct, a beekeeping byproduct in Brazil that destroys small cell lung cancer. And so I'm so passionate about protecting our bees because there is medicine in apitherapy that is truly life altering. And I think they just, I sound like such a paranoid person, but I just think the powers that be don't want us to know that. They don't want us to have access to that. And glyphosate is going to destroy that magic for us.
Yeah. And electromagnetic radiation as well.
Right.
Destroying the bees.
Right. The moment they put in a tower over here, I was taking a walk and I just saw hundreds of dead bees just stunned on the ground. And I can tell the difference between a poisoned bee and a shocked bee. They're very different. And I couldn't explain it. And it went on for weeks.
Yeah. Just going back to things that people use in the nasal passage. What do you think of neti pots?
I think it's okay. There's a risk with a neti pot, especially with a child, that they have a very shallow sinal mucosal system, and you can accidentally send pathogens and bacteria very quickly into their little shallow systems and worsen an infection, and it will go beyond your natural biome's trap and prevent system. So I'm very careful about neti potting children. I think it has its place. If you're a good neti potter, I applaud you. I am not. I would be very cautious about using very clean water and not an excessive amount of saline, because otherwise you're sterilizing instead of washing out, because in a lot of saline is just a sterilant. So I admire people that can neti pot. I feel like I'm waterboarding myself every time I do it. So I'm a neti pot dropout. I can't really, I failed.
Yeah, it was interesting what you were saying about, the super honey or the Manuka that, it can disrupt biofilm. I think that's really interesting. Because if it can disrupt it on the skin, I'm sure it can disrupt it elsewhere as well.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, that's quite interesting. And talking about Manuka and honey, can you tell us a little bit about the products that you offer?
So when I first started creating my products, I knew I wanted it to be a nasal swab because I'm a neti pot dropout and I'm terrible at that. So I knew I wanted a swab and not a spray, because even sprays bother me. And when I was a spray user, when I was a high school teacher, I was getting sick every month. That's where I learned that I was basically I had chronic sinusitis because I was sending bacteria further up into my sinuses every single time I used a spray. So for me, I knew it was going to be a swab. And then once I began my sort of research relationship with Dr. Mullen before he passed away, I knew that super honey was maybe the simplest solution to this problem. How can we deal with pathogens latched on in a dormancy phase? How can we deal with colonization load without destroying everything that is good in the nasal biome that's already functioning well? How can we assist? And for me, that was simple, was creating a super honey blend. It took me 2 years to come up with the exact right blend, because not all honey is created equal. For instance, we were trying different grades of Manuka and getting blood pressure headaches because the mucosal system is so delicate, like the vagina, like the mouth. You can't just put anything in there. It has immediate impacts on you. And it took us a couple of years to come up with the right blend. Yeah, we would get I got a blood pressure headache off of 2 different honeys I had from 2 different sources. One gave me bloody noses. Like it's a delicate dance up there. So and so it took me a couple of years to come up with that. And then I thought I was just going to sell it at farmers markets because I grew up in a country store in Maine. I'm like, well, that's how it works. I'm going to jar up my magical remedy and I'm going to sell it to people in farmers markets. And I was giving it to police departments and the local teachers union because school was starting and everybody gets sick at the beginning of school. And I was getting fantastic feedback. People were like, I used it and I had a cold for 1 day, or everyone gets sick around me and I didn't. And that never happened. So I was getting this great feedback and I knew I was onto something. But then my husband, being the good environmental attorney, he's a recovering environmental attorney, is like, no, honey, that's super illegal. You can't do that. We have to become a drug. Now, if I had known 15 years ago what it meant to become an OTC pharmaceutical, I may not have seen it through. But I knew I was actually impacting the common cold, the thing that they call uncurable. I was making a difference. So we hired an FDA compliance attorney and we jumped through all the hoops and became a homeopathic remedy and worked with some of the top homeopaths in the country to infuse my honey blend with homeopathic remedies to deal with active infection. So if you're already colonized and sick, it would help with swollen chronic swelling and postnasal drip and those things to deal with active symptoms. And that's how I came to market. And that's how I created Cold Be Gone and Allergy Be Gone for adults and kids. So, and it has been going beautifully up till now. I've gotten in over 12,000 stores globally. But now the FDA has decided they're going to change all the rules that have been in place for decades. And they're trying to basically do away with, a huge portion of small remedy and small supplement companies and things people use to build their terrain back up and build and be the best they can be naturally. They just simply don't want that to exist. And so they're chipping away at it slowly. And they're coming for the little companies first because they can't go for the big, vitamin companies or the big homeopathic companies. So those are multi-million-dollar companies and they will fight back. So they're chipping away at the little companies first, which is really unfortunate because a lot of us, even though we've banded together and we have some advocacy groups now, are minority owned or women owned. Because I think that a lot of these remedies and things come out of people's kitchens because they had a loved one or a real life problem they wanted to solve and protect. So yeah, that's the current state of affairs for my little company.
You're listening to the Radical Health Rebel podcast.
Just a brief interruption to this podcast to talk about adult acne. Now, did you know that 40 to 54% of men and women older than 25 years will have some degree of facial acne, and that clinical facial acne persists into middle age in 12% of women and 3% of men? I know only too well the devastating effects that acne can have on your confidence and your self-esteem, and how it can easily destroy your social life, your career, and your relationships. I know this only too well because I suffered from severe cystic acne from age 13 to 31. Over an 18-year period, I visited my doctor on many occasions, and his only suggestions were acne creams, harsh cleansers, and antibiotics that weren't working and were actually making my skin worse. After 18 years of struggle and thousands of pounds invested in treatments that didn't work, through my professional education, I began to learn that what my doctor had told me was untrue, and that diet was directly related to acne, plus other factors such as food sensitivities, toxicity, hormones, and balancing the body's microbiome. Putting what I had learned into practice, I managed to rid myself of acne over 20 years ago and have been helping others to do the same for well over a decade. By teaching people what foods cause acne, what food sensitivities each individual has, how to optimize their detox pathways, how to reduce environmental stresses and toxins, and how to balance hormones, especially those related to the mTOR pathway, a major causal factor with acne, I've been able to help many other adults overcome their acne nightmare too. So if you would like more information on how to overcome your adult acne, please go to www.skinwebinar.com. That's www.skinwebinar.com, where you can also request an acne breakthrough call with me to see if you are suitable for my Eliminate Adult Acne coaching program, where you can once and for all learn how to overcome your adult acne. Now, back to the podcast. So you said there's two main products.
Cold Be Gone and Allergy.
So what was the first one?
Cold Be Gone nasal swab remedy for adults and kids, and Allergy Be Gone nasal swab remedy for adults and kids. It's good for ages 1 and up, although the new regulations say you have to say 4 and up. And the formulations between the adults and kids are exactly the same. It's just an FDA requirement that if you market it to kids, it has to say for kids.
Right. Gotcha. So the Allergy Be Gone, what kind of conditions is that useful for?
That's very specifically for the non-productive swelling, to build your biome back up, but it's very specifically for that non-productive swelling. If you use it at bedtime and you go to lay down, you only have to swab a little way into the nostril, and then your cilia will deliver it to the back end of the nasal mucosa all the way back to the adenoid zone, even if you don't have adenoids. And that's where your body heat will send it. And then when you lay down at night, that will help take the inflammation out of your nose at night. Because most people, when they lay down, that's when the non-productive swelling is the worst.
Yeah.
And it's hard to fall asleep like that.
So that's good for any kind of congestive kind of condition.
Yes.
Gotcha.
It builds your biome back up, which is beneficial in general, although we're not allowed to talk about that. Like, I make no curative claims regarding your biome.
Yeah. And the Cold Be Gone obviously does what it says on the tin. That's if you've got a cold.
Right.
And how?
For any upper respiratory illness.
Right. Gotcha. And how do people apply the swab? I guess it's pretty simple.
Yeah, it's just a little tube. It has about 70 doses in it because you use a tiny bit. You know, some people use too much, and I'm always battling against that. Think of it like giving a toddler toothpaste. It's the size of an O on a keyboard. A tiny dot, a little bit goes a long way. You take an ordinary cotton swab from your own house, although the next round of production will have swabs included. I got some nice organic cotton swabs. So you put it on there and you just swab. You don't need a fresh swab per nostril, although some people say that's disgusting. I think it's wasteful. So it's your own nose. Swab, and that's it. And then your body heat delivers it to where it needs to be.
Gotcha. So the swabs that you use aren't the ones like we saw on the TV a lot in 2020 and 21 when they were scraping the bottom of people's brains with the swabs.
No, and did you notice how that got more and more shallow? Like they were like injuring people needlessly, because the fact of the matter is the viral material can be detected all the way down. So you don't need, my swabs are very shallow. Just the tip is how I like to joke about that. It's just the tip.
Yeah, I do know there were some people that had the PCR swab. Mm-hmm. They were actually reporting fluid running out of their nose afterwards. Yeah. And what that was, it was cerebral spinal fluid. So it actually damaged, the area below the base of the brain, and they had cerebral spinal fluid actually flowing out of their nostrils afterwards.
That's terrifying.
It's just awful. Absolutely awful. So with regards to your products, what kind of quality standards do you ensure with them?
Well, it's a natural honey product, so it's going to have natural yeast and molds in it, but the FDA requires it be practically sterile. So we do use some sterilized honey, some irradiated honeys in the honey blend, but it sounds scary to say irradiated honey. It's actually the cleanest way to deal with a honey. Medical grade Manuka is in fact irradiated because you don't want to apply a high bioburden of yeast and molds to an already colonized wound because it's immunocompromised, that situation. So it's the same thing when it comes to the nasal mucosal system. So we have very, very intense scrutiny of every batch that goes through, that it needs to be a medical grade nasal product. And that's how we do that. And of course we have the best apitherapy sources in New Zealand. My honey comes directly from New Zealand. There's a lot of corruption in the honey production world. And so we work very closely with our honey manufacturers and our producers that we have the best Manuka possible and it's not corrupted.
Gotcha. In terms of Manuka, is there anything that you've not mentioned already as to, why is it that you use Manuka? Is there anything else that perhaps you wanted to say about Manuka specifically?
I love Manuka. I think every mom should have Manuka. I will tell you right now, if your kid is throwing up and you give them a spoon of Manuka, it will end that situation. This is not medical advice. This is just mom advice, but it is a truth. So I think Manuka honey is, it's one of the 12 super honeys. There's only 12 that we know of now. I'm sure there's a lot more that we just haven't figured out. But if you're going to buy Manuka and you want quality Manuka, I think you should go for the UMF grading system. It's Dr. Mullen's original system. There's a lot. There's an MGO and there's some other systems that have been invented by Manuka producers because they don't want to pay into the UMF grading system. I prefer UMF because I have a soft spot for Dr. Mullen and his work, and I know his intentions and his heart and his behind it all, and that matters to me. So if you are looking for quality Manuka, look for something between UMF 12 plus and UMF 15 plus, and that is the, no pun intended, sweet spot for getting a honey that will greatly enhance your health. If you have H. pylori and you have gut issues, a spoon of Manuka a day can really be a game changer for you. If you have a kid that's got a stomach bug, Manuka honey 15 plus is exactly what you should be giving them. So I try to tell everyone I know, get some Manuka honey before it becomes more expensive and more impossible to find. Because right now a quality UMF 15 Manuka is running between $60 and $80 a jar.
Yeah. And also Manuka does taste very nice as well.
It doesn't. It tastes awful.
You think so?
It does. It tastes terrible. Well, if you get the real medical grade Manuka, right. I'm a child of the 80s. And when we had sore throats, our parents in the United States would spray this stuff in our throat called, what was it called? It was terrible. Manuka honey actually smells like that and tastes like it. When you eat a high grade medical, Manuka that's got a great UMF value, you will feel the tingling and the burning. Your tongue will go a little numb. The medicinal value of it is evident the moment it hits your palate. So heads up for people that think they're going to take a big old fat spoonful of something sweet and wonderful. It's not necessarily like that. Although some people love the taste of it. I trained my children to like it from early on. So thank God they like it. But I still cannot get a spoon of it down without making a lot of faces.
Yeah, I've had 15 plus and I like the taste of it.
Do you really?
Yeah. Maybe it's because I've not really eaten sweet foods for a very, very long time, and maybe that tastes really sweet to me. But
yeah,
I mean, carrots taste really sweet to me. So
yeah, it is sweet, but it does have that medicinal something in it that's different. You can tell. Yeah.
The only problem I have is I can't eat oats. So I used to put it in porridge oats, and I can't eat oats anymore. And I don't really have anything else to eat it with.
Oh, yeah. Well, you shouldn't heat it. Never, ever heat it because it will lose a lot of its enzymatic activity. And that's part of its magic. I mean, yeah, it'll still have methylglyoxal. You can actually artificially inflate the methylglyoxal by heating it. That's one of the things that some of the unethical honey producers will do, especially the counterfeit Manuka that's coming out of China. They'll warehouse it and they will falsely inflate the methylglyoxal by storing it, and it becomes darker and darker. And that's how they're achieving higher UMFs that are above 16. Like you'll see a UMF 20 or blah, blah, blah. So the old thinking was that anything that was UMF 20 and above was falsely inflated through storage, improper storage, and letting it sort of age. And Dr. Mullen, before he passed away, was convinced that that was a risk, in his opinion, after studying honey all his life, for creating a bee allergic reaction in a non-bee allergic person to falsely inflate the methylglycol. Now, the thinking in that has changed, and this is one of those things where I used to assert that because that's how I was taught with Dr. Mullen. But now the beekeepers I'm working with now are like, no, we have UMF 32. And that's how we used to think of it, that having the methylglycol be at that high level is not harmful to people. It's actually beneficial. And a jar of UMF 32 is $3,000. So I don't know. I just impart the information. It used to be this line of thinking and now it's this. But is that driven by the value of that honey? You know what I mean? I don't know how to take it.
Yeah, and I guess what's happening to our bee populations. It's probably only going to get more and more expensive.
Yes, exactly. Support your local beekeepers. If you have the ability to maintain hives in your backyard, in any way, shape, or form, or to host a hive, because beekeepers will come and put hives in your yard, please do it. It's literally the only way we're going to ever combat what's happening. And those little hives are really productive. It's one of those tiny things you can do that actually makes a difference. Every time you recycle, you wonder, am I really making a difference? Hosting a hive actually makes a difference.
Mm. And in your opinion, how important are bees to our future?
If we lose our bees, we die.
Mm.
Yeah. If we continue to poison our bees and destroy their environment and poison the air with the EMFs and disrupt their patterns, our species won't survive. We're utterly dependent upon our pollinators.
Mm. Yeah. And we're definitely going down the wrong road, aren't we?
In every way.
Yeah.
In every way possible. Is there anything we're doing right other than us sharing, and talking and trying to beat against it?
Yeah. In a recent episode I did with Paul Check, he was saying, he wants to see, a time where anything that we do that pollutes our air or our soils or our waterways, because they're essential to life, that those things become illegal. Because if we continue along this current path, as you said, we won't be here anymore.
No.
If we continue bringing out more and more generations of, 4G and 5G, etc., and, we're spraying these poisons in the air to change the climate, which we know the people that are telling us we need to change to save the climate.
Mm-hmm.
And, we're getting all these chemical spills all around the world. So I didn't realize that was happening outside the US.
Oh yeah.
Then, it's not looking too good for the future. So, each and every one of us need to do what we can do to prevent that from happening. Otherwise, I've been on this earth for a fairly long time, and I really am concerned about young people because I've had my life, right? I've had mine. I've had a lot of fun. I mean, I suppose I should have another 30 years to go statistically. But, if we don't create a lot of change now in terms of the direction we're going, our children won't have a future. It's as simple as that.
I agree wholeheartedly. And I think that this climate action that they give lip service to is completely misdirected and not at all going to impact climate. I mean, we should all be taking personal responsibility for the climate, but this nonsense about, controlling how people move about in cities and electric cars and all that. Yeah, that's all well and good. What about the massive polluters coming out of China? What about these industrial fires that go unchecked? I mean, corporate production and waste is what's destroying our environment and the oceans. So that needs to be addressed before we try to control the population with whether or not we're allowed to eat meat.
Mm. It's quite ironic that it's those people that have been destroying the environment for decades are the ones that are saying that the rest of us have to pay for it. But yet those that have been destroying the environment are the ones that can carry on doing what they're doing, flying around in jets and eating the best steaks, while the rest of us, well, I don't want to say what they've got planned because it's too depressing to even think about it.
Try not to think about it, because we got to keep our energy high, because this only works if we keep our energy high. That's all we have, is to keep communicating, keep sharing, and keep our energy elevated as best we can in the face of all of this.
Yeah. So at the beginning, I mentioned that the UK, Australia, New Zealand have the highest incidence levels of allergic rhinitis. Do you have any thoughts on why those countries in particular have the highest rates?
I would imagine it has something to do with the humidity, but I don't really know. I'm not going to tell you I have a solid theory on that.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I mean, I don't know the answer, but the one thing I think that we probably, because our weather is quite different. I mean, the UK and New Zealand might be kind of similar, I guess, but Australia's climate is completely different, and and there's slightly different climates within Australia as well. I mean, it's a huge country, but the one thing that we do have in common is our culture, and with that comes diet as well. I would say our diets are pretty much.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd say Australia are a little bit more influenced by the American diet, and they are the most obese country on the planet. And USA is obviously number 2. But I just wonder, because one of the things that I've experienced working with clients over the years is that with things like hay fever, asthma, what I found is when I start to help people change their diet, and in particular eliminate foods that their body is sensitive to, so a food sensitivity, quite often that turns around and their asthma or their hay fever can go away.
So anti-inflammatory, like that?
Yeah. So,
that makes sense.
Things like gluten and dairy, which are very common, if people are sensitive to those and they cut them out over time, I've seen clients have actually reversed things like asthma and eczema. I mean, so they're doing other things as well. But yeah, that's why I wanted to just throw that question out there, because I just wondered if that might be something that you've seen as well. And that's just an idea that I don't know if it's true or not, but.
Well, that would make sense. I mean, there's something about their terrain, about their biome that is altered, right? So for instance, I just started researching, this is horrible, fecal microbial transplants and why that is so effective in people, in reversing all inflammatory disease, including asthma and allergic conditions. So I've been researching that. And then at the heart of that is a particular bacteria called Lactobacillus reuteri. And Lactobacillus reuteri, when it exists have you heard of that? Have you gone to, yeah. So it's the human breast milk strain that they vilified in the 60s and 70s when the formula companies were trying to vilify all breast milk. It's one of the only human breast milk derived strains. And so somebody patented it. So that's why none of your probiotic strains contain it unless they've paid for the privilege of using it. So L. reuteri is, been studied on surgical wound floors in hospitals, and it's reduced complication rates by 80% when they gave just that one strain alone to patients. So I feel like, maybe those countries as a collective, as a tribe, are lacking something in their biome uniformly. And that's why, and then combine that with the pollution of those particular areas, or just the climate of those areas, combined with the terrain being altered in some massive way as a population. Maybe that's why.
I guess the other thing that's probably very similar as well is the medical systems in each of those countries. That they're probably, because they're very, Australia and New Zealand are very much based on the English system, being former colonies. So maybe that's the case. I don't know. Maybe. So Joyce, is there anything we've not covered that you want to cover before we go?
No, I think we've covered a lot. I mean, we could talk forever. You are an amazing resource. The stuff we talked about before we went live, I've got notes. I've got homework.
Awesome. So what's next for you, Joyce?
I'm going to keep fighting the good fight over here and teaching people about their nasal biome. So if you want to chat with me about that, especially if you're a worried mom and you want to talk about that or homeschooling, because my children have always been homeschooled and they're straight A students who are getting ready for college. So I encourage moms to reach out to me because that's my wheelhouse. I don't pretend to be a scientist. I am just a mom that has gone down the rabbit hole in 100 different ways. And so if you're a mom and you want to reach out to me and chat, please do. You can find me on Instagram or TikTok or Facebook or Twitter.
Cool. And what's the URLs for your...
It's either Buzzagogo, which is the name of my company, Buzzagogo, Buzzagogo, or Cold Be Gone, and that's B with 2 E's like a bumblebee. So if you Google either one of those or my name, I'm going to pop up all over the place. And I try to answer every email I get personally because I know that really matters.
Yeah, definitely. Awesome. So Joyce, thank you so much yet again for taking your time out, of your valuable day. Share your wisdom with the Radical Health Rebel listeners and viewers. And to all the Radical Health Rebel tribe, if you know someone who would benefit from watching or hearing this episode, please make sure to share the love and forward it on to them. After all, the mission of this show is to help people lead a more fun-filled, healthy, productive, fulfilling, and happy life. And if you appreciate my amazing guests and the wisdom they share with you each week, and you'd like to show your appreciation by supporting the podcast, you can become a subscriber to the Radical Health Rebel Podcast Plus, starting at just $3 a month, or you can check out a 7-day free trial at our Patreon channel at patreon.com/Radical Health Rebel, where you'll also have access to lots of exclusive premium content and exclusive discount offers included in your membership. And full details can be found in the show notes. So that's all from Joyce and me for this week. But don't forget, you can join me same time, same place next week on the Radical Health Rebel podcast.
Thanks for tuning in to the Radical Health Rebel podcast with Leigh Brandon. You can find Leigh at www.bodycheck.co.uk. That's BODYCHEK.co.uk. Please hit the like button and share on your social media and with someone you feel will benefit from watching this episode. So together we can help them lead a healthier, more productive, fulfilling and happy life.